People mocked a mountain man for choosing the obese girl. 3 years later, the whole town in shock. The small town of Red Creek nestled between Stone Mountains and endless snow in the Wyoming Territory, 1880. Life here was harsh, and the hearts of its people rarely warmed beyond what necessity demanded. 20-year-old Mary Dawson had known cruelty her entire life. From childhood, when other children called her names and refused to play with her, through her teenage years when young men made her the punchline of crude jokes, into adulthood where she'd become Red Creek's most convenient target. She worked at the Silver Pine Inn as a cleaning girl and dishwasher. The pay was meager, $8 a month, but it included a tiny room in the attic and one meal per day. It should have been enough to slowly save money, to perhaps one day escape this place. But Mary's father, Thomas Dawson, had other plans for any coins she managed to hide away. Thomas had been a good man once, or so Mary's late mother used to say. But alcohol and gambling had rotted him from the inside out. Every few weeks he'd appear at the inn, demand Mary's savings, and disappear into the saloon or poker rooms. Mary would protest, would cry, would beg, but it never mattered. He was her father, and fathers had rights over their daughters, even worthless daughters like her. "Please, Pa," Mary had whispered 3 weeks ago, clutching the small tin that held her last $7. "I need this. My boots have holes. Winter's coming." "Winter's always coming," Thomas had slurred, snatching the tin. "You're young. You'll survive. Now be a good girl and don't shame me with your whining." That was the last time she'd seen him. 2 days ago, men had come to the inn looking for Thomas Dawson. Not friendly men, debt collectors with hard eyes and harder fists. They'd found Mary scrubbing floors instead. "Your father owes Mr. Pike $90, the lead man had said. 3 months of bar tabs plus gambling debts. He's run off somewhere, which means his debts fall to you. I don't have $90. I barely have 90 cents. Then you'll work it off. Pike's authorized us to sell your labor contract. You'll fetch enough to cover most of it." Now, on this cold October morning, Mary stood in the town square, her hands bound with rough rope, tears streaming down her round cheeks as a crowd gathered for the spectacle. The platform where she stood was typically used for livestock auctions. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "All right, folks," bellowed Jake Pike, owner of the Silver Pine Saloon and half the town's vice. He was a large man with a cruel smile and a voice that carried like thunder. "Got ourselves an interesting item today. Mary Dawson, age 20, strong as an ox and built like one, too." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mary's face burned with shame. "Her deadbeat father ran off owing me $90, so I'm selling her labor contract, 5 years of work to whoever wants her. She can clean, cook, wash dishes, good stamina even if she eats like 3 normal people." More laughter. Mary wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth and never surface again. "Now, who'll start the bidding? $20? 15? Come on, folks, she's got to be worth something." "I'll give you $5, called out Mrs. Henderson from the general store. "I need someone to haul feed sacks. She looks strong enough." $5? That's insulting. This girl's worth at least $10, a farmer named Garrett offered, but only if she can work my fields all summer. "Don't know if she'll hold up in the heat, though. Might collapse." The crowd chuckled. Mary bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. "Look at her," someone shouted. "She's crying like a baby. Probably can't handle real work." How much does she weigh? My livestock scale only goes to 300 pounds. "Bet she eats more than she's worth in wages." The mockery built like a wave, each comment crueler than the last. Mary's shoulders shook with silent sobs. She'd endured bullying her entire life. But this, being sold like livestock while people laughed, was a new depth of degradation. $12, called another voice, "but she better not eat me out of house and home." Pike was about to accept when a deep, gravelly voice cut through the noise. "I'll pay $90. The crowd went silent. Every head turned. A man stood at the edge of the square, having emerged from the trees so quietly that no one had noticed his approach. He was massive, at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He wore buckskin clothing marked by weather and trails. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered most of his weathered face. But it was his eyes, pale gray like winter ice, that commanded attention. Elias Bear McGraw. Everyone in Red Creek knew of him, though few knew him. He was a mountain man who lived alone in the high country, coming to town only twice yearly for supplies. There were stories about him, that he'd killed 3 claim jumpers who'd tried to murder him, that he could track a ghost through snow, that he'd once survived a grisly attack with nothing but a knife. He was legend, and he was walking toward the auction platform with a leather bag in his hand. "Did you say $90? Pike's eyes gleamed with greed. "I did." Elias's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. He set the bag on the platform. It clinked heavily. Gold coins, not paper money. "That covers her father's debt in full. She goes free." Pike grabbed the bag and dumped the contents. Sure enough, $90 in gold coins glittered in the morning sun. "Well, I'll be damned. Sold," Pike grinned. "She's all yours, Bear." The crowd exploded into shocked murmurs and mocking laughter. "Bear McGraw bought the fat girl. What's he going to do with her? Use her to weigh down his wagon? Guess he's been in the mountains too long. His standards have dropped. Maybe he needs someone to scare away the actual bears." But Elias ignored the crowd completely. He stepped onto the platform, pulled out a knife. Several people gasped and stepped back and cut the ropes binding Mary's wrists. "Come on," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her. "Let's go." Mary stared at him in shock. Up close, she could see scars on his hands, the weathered lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. He looked dangerous, but his eyes, when they met hers, held no mockery, no disgust, just patience. "Why?" Mary whispered. "Why would you waste your money on me?" "Wasn't wasted, and we can talk about it later. Right now, let's leave before this crowd gets any more insufferable." He offered his hand, not to grab her, not to force her, but offering, giving her a choice. Mary took it. His hand was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold morning, and strong enough to steady her as she climbed down from the platform. The crowd parted before them, still laughing and jeering. "Good luck, Bear. You're going to need it. Hope she doesn't eat you out of your cabin. 3 months! I give it 3 months before he brings her back." Elias didn't respond to any of it. He simply walked through the crowd with Mary at his side, leading her toward the edge of town where 2 horses waited, a large bay gelding and a sturdy brown mare. "Can you ride?" Elias asked. "Some. It's been years." "She'll be gentle." He helped Mary onto the mare with surprising care. "Her name's Patience. Fitting, don't you think?" For the first time in longer than Mary could remember, she felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward, almost a smile. They rode out of Red Creek as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind the laughter, the mockery, and the only life Mary had ever known. She had no idea where she was going. She had no idea what this strange mountain man wanted from her. But as they climbed into the foothills and the town disappeared behind them, Mary felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. They rode in silence for the first hour, climbing steadily into rougher terrain. The mountain air was crisp and clean, so different from the smoky, unwashed smell of Red Creek. Mary breathed deeply, feeling her lungs expand in a way they never had before. "We'll stop at Willow Creek for lunch," Elias said finally, the first words he'd spoken since leaving town. "About 2 hours ahead. The horses need rest, and I imagine you do too." "I'm fine," Mary said automatically, then caught herself. That was the response she'd been trained to give. Never complain, never admit weakness, never be a burden. But Elias had just paid $90 for her. She owed him honesty. "Actually, I'm not fine. I'm terrified and confused, and I don't understand why you did what you did back there." Elias nodded slowly. "That's fair. We'll talk at Willow Creek. But Mary," he glanced back at her, "you don't owe me anything beyond honest work. I didn't buy you. I paid your father's debt. There's a difference." The distinction seemed important to him, though Mary wasn't sure she understood it yet. When they reached Willow Creek, Elias helped her dismount and immediately began unpacking supplies. Within minutes, he had a small fire going and was heating water for coffee. "Here," he handed her a tin cup and a chunk of dried meat. "Eat. You look half-starved." Mary hesitated. Years of mockery had taught her to minimize her eating in public, to pretend she wasn't hungry even when her stomach ached with emptiness. "Not going to judge you," Elias said quietly, somehow reading her hesitation. "Up here, if you're hungry, you eat. Simple as that." So Mary ate, and when Elias offered her more, she took it, feeling strange and guilty and relieved all at once. "Now," Elias said, settling against a tree with his own cup of coffee, "I imagine you have questions. Why did you pay $90 for me?" "Because it was the right thing to do. You were being sold like livestock, and that's wrong. Nobody deserves that treatment." "But you don't know me. I could be lazy, incompetent, exactly as worthless as everyone says. Are you?" The directness of the question stopped Mary mid-sentence. "What? Are you lazy? Incompetent? Worthless?" I don't think so. I work hard. I've always worked hard. But people say a lot of things. Most of it's noise." Elias took a sip of coffee. "I watched you at the inn for 2 days before the auction. Saw you hauling laundry that would break most men's backs. Saw you scrubbing floors on your knees for hours. Saw you working through lunch because Mrs. Henderson demanded it. You're not lazy. You're strong and capable." Mary felt tears prick her eyes. "Then why does everyone treat me like I'm worthless?" "Because people are cruel to those who look different. It makes them feel superior." His voice carried old pain. "I know something about that." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing terrible scars, burn marks that covered his forearm and disappeared under his shirt. "House fire when I was 16. Killed my parents. Nearly killed me. For years, people called me monster. Said my face would scare children. So I came to the mountains where the only thing that matters is whether you're strong enough to survive." Mary stared at the scars, then at Elias's face. Weathered and scarred, yes, but also kind in a way Red Creek had never been. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we go to my cabin. It's 3 days' ride from here, up in the Tetons. You'll work as my assistant, helping with pelts, preserving food, maintaining the cabin. I'll pay you $20 a month, which is more than you were making at the inn. You'll have your own room, regular meals, and most importantly, respect." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. "Because 18 years ago someone showed me kindness when I desperately needed it. Someone who didn't judge, didn't mock, just helped. I've never forgotten that. And when I saw you on that platform, I saw a chance to pay that kindness forward." Mary wanted to ask more, but something in Elias's expression suggested the conversation was over. They finished their lunch in companionable silence, then continued their journey into the mountains. 3 days of hard riding brought them to Elias's cabin. It sat in a hidden valley surrounded by towering pines and snow-capped peaks with a clear stream running nearby. The cabin itself was solidly built, 2 rooms, a loft, a covered porch, and behind it a workshop and smokehouse. "It's beautiful," Mary breathed. "It's home," Elias said simply. "Come on, I'll show you around." Over the following weeks, Mary discovered that mountain life was indeed hard. The work was relentless, the weather brutal, and the isolation complete. But it was also liberating. There was no one to mock her size as she hauled water from the stream. No one to make cruel comments when she ate heartily after a long day's work. Just Elias, who treated her efforts with genuine appreciation and taught her mountain skills with patient guidance. She learned to cure hides, to identify medicinal plants, to predict weather by watching animal behavior. Her body grew stronger, her confidence increased, and slowly she began to believe what Elias had said, that her worth wasn't determined by her appearance, but by her character and capabilities. But she also noticed Elias watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not attraction. Their relationship was firmly professional. But something else. Recognition, maybe? Or regret. One evening, 6 months after arriving at the cabin, Mary finally asked about it. "Elias, why do you look at me sometimes like you're trying to remember something?" He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you remind me of someone important." "Who?" "A little girl, long time ago. She saved my life." And slowly, haltingly, Elias told her the story. 18 years ago, when he was 12 years old, Elias had run away from the town where people mocked his scars. He'd fled into the forest in winter, poorly dressed and unprepared. He'd fallen, injured his ankle, and was slowly freezing to death when a small, chubby girl found him. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, but she'd bandaged his ankle with strips from her own dress, had scolded him for stepping on wildflowers. "They're trying to live just like you," and had freed a squirrel from a trap before helping Elias to her family's nearby cabin. She gave me hot soup and a blanket, told me I was beautiful because I'd survived, that scars were proof of strength, not ugliness. Elias's voice was thick with emotion. I never forgot her. Never forgot that a child showed me more kindness than any adult ever had. Mary's hands had begun to shake. Wildflowers, a squirrel in a trap, a boy with terrible scars. What was her name?" Mary whispered. "She never told me. I asked, but she just smiled and said names didn't matter as much as kindness." Elias looked at Mary directly. "But when I saw you on that auction platform, when I saw how people were treating you, I saw that little girl, and I knew I couldn't walk away." Mary stood abruptly, her heart racing. She crossed to the small shelf where she kept her few belongings and pulled out a tattered cloth doll. "Did she have one of these?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. Elias stared at the doll. Yes, she was carrying it, had a red dress, button eyes. "And a missing arm," Mary finished, "because I'd given the fabric to bandage a boy's ankle." The silence stretched between them, heavy with recognition, an impossible coincidence. "That was you?" Elias's voice cracked. "You were that little girl?" "I lived with my grandparents in a cabin near the edge of Whitewood Forest. I found you by the stream. You were crying and shivering, and I just wanted to help." Tears streamed down Mary's face. "I thought about you for years. Wondered if you'd survived. Hoped you'd found kindness somewhere." Elias crossed the cabin in 3 strides and pulled Mary into an embrace. "You saved my life. Not just physically. You saved my spirit. Gave me hope when I had none." "And you saved mine," Mary whispered against his chest. 18 years later, when I'd lost all hope, you appeared. Like fate brought us back together." They held each other as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the pines outside. 2 people who'd shown each other kindness in their darkest moments, reunited by impossible circumstance. "Thank you," Elias said quietly, "for being kind to a scared boy, for teaching me that worth isn't measured by appearance, for being the reason I could show you the same grace 18 years later." "We saved each other," Mary replied, "twice." 3 years passed. Under Elias's patient teaching and the demands of mountain living, Mary transformed. Not physically. She remained a large woman, but she grew strong, confident, and genuinely happy in ways she'd never imagined possible. She and Elias had married in the 2nd year, a quiet ceremony with just a traveling preacher as witness. Their relationship had evolved from professional partnership to genuine love, built on mutual respect and shared history. They rarely went to Red Creek. There was no need. They were self-sufficient, and the town held only painful memories for Mary. But in the winter of their 3rd year together, everything changed. A blizzard, unlike anything in living memory, descended on the territory. For 2 weeks, snow fell without stopping, driven by winds that could knock a man off his feet. Temperatures plummeted to deadly lows, and Red Creek, which had grown complacent with mild winters, was unprepared. Elias and Mary heard about it from a half-frozen trapper who'd stumbled to their cabin. "Town's dying," he gasped. "Supply wagons can't get through. People are burning furniture to stay warm. Children are starving. They're just waiting to die." Mary and Elias exchanged glances. They had everything they needed. Their cabin was well stocked, properly insulated, with enough supplies to last months. Red Creek had nothing. The town that had mocked Mary, sold her like livestock, treated her as worthless, was dying. "We have to help them," Mary said quietly. "Are you sure? After everything they did to you?" "Yes." Mary's voice was firm. "Because we're better than they were. Because kindness matters more than revenge. And because a long time ago, a little girl taught me that everyone deserves help when they're suffering." Elias smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still took Mary's breath away. "Then let's save a town." They spent 2 days preparing. They loaded 3 wagons with supplies: dried meat, preserved vegetables, flour, beans, firewood, blankets, and medical supplies. They hitched their strongest horses and mules. And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, they set out for Red Creek. The journey should have taken 8 hours. In the blizzard, it took nearly 2 days. But finally, as the sun broke through clouds on the 2nd afternoon, they crested the hill overlooking Red Creek. The town looked like a ghost settlement. No smoke rose from chimneys. No people moved in the streets. The only sound was the wind howling through empty buildings. "Dear God," Mary whispered, "are we too late?" But then a door opened. A child emerged, wrapped in every piece of clothing they owned, trying to gather snow for water. The child saw the wagons and screamed, not in fear, but in desperate hope. "People! Someone's coming! We're saved!" Doors flew open. People stumbled into the street, gaunt, wrapped in rags, eyes hollow with hunger and cold. They stared at the 3 wagons piled high with supplies, at the strong horses, at Elias and Mary themselves, and then someone recognized them. That's Bear McGraw and Mary Dawson. The fat girl, the one we sold. They came back? After everything we did?" Elias pulled the lead wagon to a stop in the town square, the same square where Mary had been auctioned 3 years before. He stood, his massive frame visible to all, his voice carrying through the cold air. "We've brought supplies, food, fuel, blankets, medicine, enough for everyone to survive until the thaw." People surged forward, some crying, some praying, all desperate. But Elias held up his hand. "Listen first. You're going to organize. No fighting, no hoarding. Everyone gets enough. The children and elderly eat first. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." They organized. Under Elias's direction and Mary's efficient distribution, supplies were rationed fairly. Fires were lit in every hearth. Hot food was prepared and distributed. Children who'd been on the verge of starvation received warm soup and bread. Elderly people who'd been slowly freezing were wrapped in blankets and moved near fires. By nightfall, Red Creek was alive again, not thriving, but surviving. And that was enough. In the town hall, the largest building with the best fire, the townspeople gathered to thank their unexpected saviors. Jake Pike, the saloon owner who'd sold Mary, stepped forward. He looked 20 years older than when Mary had last seen him, and his face was etched with shame. "Mary, Mrs. McGraw, I don't know how to apologize for what I did, for what we all did." Mary looked around at the faces she'd once known. Mrs. Henderson, who'd worked her to exhaustion, Garrett, the farmer who'd offered $10 for her labor, the people who'd laughed as she stood bound on the auction platform. They all looked ashamed now, frightened, aware of how close they'd come to death and how the person they'd treated worst had saved them. "Why did you come back?" someone asked. "After everything we did to you?" Mary took a breath. "Because 18 years ago, when I was just a child, I helped a boy who was injured and cold. I didn't ask if he deserved help. I didn't judge him. I just helped because it was the right thing to do." She gestured to Elias. "That boy grew into this man, Elias McGraw, the man you all call Bear. When he found me on the auction platform 3 years ago, he remembered that kindness, and he showed me the same grace I'd shown him as a child." Tears were streaming down faces now. Jake Pike was openly weeping. "You taught me," Mary continued, "that sometimes the kindest act in childhood can echo through the years, that helping someone when they need it most can change everything. So when we heard Red Creek was suffering, I remembered that lesson. I remembered that kindness matters more than revenge, that everyone deserves help when they're truly in need." She looked around the room. "You were cruel to me. You mocked me, sold me, treated me like I was worthless. But you were wrong. I'm not worthless. I never was. And neither are any of you, even if you forgot that for a while." Reverend Matthews, Red Creek's preacher, stood on shaky legs. "We owe you more than our lives. We owe you our humanity. You showed us what we'd become, cruel, small-minded people who judged worth by appearance. You showed us what we should have been, kind, compassionate, willing to help those in need." "What can we do?" Mrs. Henderson asked through tears. "How can we possibly repay you?" "Be better," Elias said simply. "When another Mary comes along, someone different, someone vulnerable, treat them with kindness instead of cruelty. That's how you repay us, by learning the lesson and passing it forward." Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, Red Creek bloomed with more than wildflowers. The town had changed. People who'd survived the blizzard survived because two people they'd treated cruelly showed them grace, carried that lesson forward. They were gentler with each other, more compassionate, more aware that worth wasn't measured by appearance, status, or conformity. On the first warm day of May, the townspeople gathered in the square once more. But this time, instead of an auction, they witnessed an unveiling. A large wooden plaque had been erected in front of the church. Carved with care and painted with loving detail, it read, "In memory of Elias Bear, McGraw, and Mary Dawson McGraw, who taught Red Creek the true meaning of kindness. No act of compassion, however small, is ever wasted. May we remember their grace and strive to embody it always." But the most remarkable thing happened as Reverend Matthews prepared to speak. Elias and Mary rode into town, unexpected and unannounced. The crowd parted silently, watching as they approached the memorial. Mary was visibly pregnant now, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Elias's arm was around her shoulders, protective and proud. "We heard you were planning this," Mary said, looking at the plaque. "We wanted to tell you, it's not necessary." "Yes, it is," Jake Pike said firmly. He'd stayed sober since the blizzard, had rebuilt his life. "Because we need to remember, need to make sure the next generation knows what happens when we forget to be kind. And what happens when someone shows us grace despite our cruelty," Mrs. Henderson added. She'd become Mary's unlikely friend over the winter, often riding up to the mountain cabin to visit. Mary looked around at the faces, still flawed, still human, but trying, learning, growing. "Then I'll say this," she said finally. "That little act of kindness I showed Elias when we were children, I never thought it would matter so much. I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped. That's all." She touched her belly. "This child will grow up hearing that story. Will learn that even the smallest act of compassion can ripple forward through years. And I hope Her voice grew stronger. I hope that every child in Red Creek learns the same lesson, that how you treat the vulnerable says everything about who you are. Elias added quietly, You mocked me for choosing Mary, called it waste, foolishness, desperation. But she's the best decision I ever made, not despite her size, not regardless of it, just because of who she is. Character, kindness, strength, that's what makes someone valuable. He looked around at the assembled crowd. Remember that. The next time you see someone different, someone vulnerable, someone the world tells you is worthless, remember Mary. Remember that you might be looking at the person who'll someday save your life. The crowd stood in silence as Elias and Mary rode away, returning to their mountain home. But the lesson remained, carved in wood and burned into hearts. Red Creek had been a town that valued appearance over character, that found entertainment in cruelty, that measured worth by narrow standards. The blizzard had nearly killed them. But two people, one mocked for his scars, one mocked for her size, had saved them. Not with judgment or revenge, but with grace. And in doing so, they'd taught a town what it meant to be truly human. 3 years after the auction, the whole town was indeed in shock. But not because of Mary's failure, because of her triumph. Because she and Elias had proven that kindness, compassion, and character matter more than appearance, status, or society's shallow judgments. They'd shown Red Creek that sometimes the people you cast aside become the ones who save you. And that's a lesson worth remembering forever.